Okay, so we have the protocol of the board and staff and public for our town meetings. Mayor runs the meeting. To speak, trustee and staff raise hand and speak when recognized by the mayor. Only one speaker at a time. Open public participation throughout the meeting will no longer be allowed. Conversations between trustees and the public will no longer be allowed, except in public comment portion of the meetings. We address each other as trustee and Madam Mayor. We move contentious items to the beginning of the agenda. We post each agenda on the whiteboard in the meeting room. Public participation. We have public comment at the beginning of meetings for agenda and non-agenda items, but not criticism of staff and not for public hearings. We also have added a public comment at the end of all of our meetings. If the public has questions, comments, concerns about the town staff, the public shall inform the administrator through written email. If the public has questions, comments, or concerns about the town administrator, then the public shall inform either the mayor or a trustee through written email. Introduction of agenda items by the administrator, discussion on agenda items, then motion and second on action items, then the final discussion on the specific motion. Trustees and mayors shall adhere to and enforce the new protocol of the board for town meetings through compliance with their adopted accountability protocol and operating. Thank you.
Okay, I do not have any revisions to the agenda for the trustees. Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. If the public would like to comment, please step up to the podium and give us your name and try to limit it to 3 minutes. Mr. Lashley is here. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Is anybody from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll go into our presentations for tonight. We have 2, a proclamation. Up front is an update by Becky Joyce and Jim Donovan on the COVID-19 coronavirus.
Okay, well, thank you all for having us present tonight. I've got just some pass out. The Office of Emergency Management and Public Health are just going to give you all an update on the current COVID-19 incident. This has been ongoing worldwide since late December, and it has reached the United States about mid-January, and it has now reached Colorado about 2 weeks ago. We currently have a total of 11 reported cases in Colorado as of today. This is a very fluid situation, so it's changing rapidly. From an emergency management and public health perspective, the entire national system has really ramped up and is taking this extremely seriously. The fatality rate has not been calculated. It's varied a little bit, but it's gone from 2% to 3.4%. To give you an idea of that rate, the Spanish influenza in 1918 was about 2% worldwide fatality rate population. So that kind of kicks it into what we call a kind of pandemic level. And we do have, each county has a pandemic plan, so we've been activating that and working with our state and federal partners on this whole process. There has been a lot of information and also really misinformation that's been getting out about the virus, so that's a big emphasis that we want to get a handle on the local side. So last week we did implement our incident management team, so we have a core team locally that we've activated. So right now that's myself, Becky Joyce, Bruce Conrad, the sheriff, and Dean Gallegos, public information officer. So we're really trying to just corral and gather any of that information, make sure the public for Sanborn County and Silverton is well informed and knows what to do. Like I said, there have been 11 reported cases in Colorado, and they've mostly been concentrated on the Front Range, so from Denver really to Summit County. And we really do have to expect that it will eventually get to our area. So the advantage we have is that we have time to plan for this, and that's that we're in very much of a pre-planning phase and really getting all of our regional partners together, making sure that everybody is prepared on what to do when it does arrive. And I'm just going to go over some of the incident side of things, and then Becky's going to go over more of the public health side of things. But I'll go through just a few of these key topics and then answer any questions that elected officials have. But right now we've got scheduled meetings with the town board. We're going to go to the school board tomorrow and give them an update as well. We've worked with them on developing their communicable disease plan, and they feel well informed at this point. We'll also be going to the county commissioners and updating them on Wednesday. We're going to be holding weekly meetings at the county courthouse in the Board of Commissioners room at 1 p.m. Those will be open for elected officials and people that we invite, and there's multiple calls and information going on all week. But we'll be basically having that as an ongoing meeting as long as this event lasts. With the current worldwide situation, this is not going to be just go away real quick. This is going to be with us for quite a while. So it's really important to emphasize having that mentality that this can last quite a while. So some of the things we've already done since Friday is gotten out press releases on social media, gotten out an article into the Silverton Standard, and we already just got out a press release just prior to this meeting. And we'll be making sure that that information is getting out not only on social media and through these meetings, but we'll be posting information in public locations so people can feel like they've got good information that they can access. Like I said, we've opened up our county pandemic plan and also our county emergency operations plan. And we've met also with EMS. EMS are really the front line for interacting when somebody is presenting any kind of symptoms. So EMS is getting specific training on how to handle a person who may or may not be infected. We have also been in contact, we're in contact with Silverton Mountain, the school district, as I said, and also Durango Training. We're reaching out to them just to ensure that they feel like they've got a good plan. So any organization that has basically a lot of people moving through it, we're making sure that they have good access to information and know how to also communicate to their customers. Some of the elements that we are concerned about are large events. As you've probably seen in the news around the country, large events have been canceled already. An example is South by Southwest in Texas and Austin was canceled, and there's been several in California and Washington State. As of right now, no large events in Colorado have been canceled, but it's something that we should not be surprised if that happens. We have no indication that Iron Horse or any large-scale events will be canceled or postponed at this time. Those are really the big pieces that I wanted to go over, and I think at this point I'll let Becky go over more of the public health messaging.
Okay, thank you. I'm Becky Joyce, Sanborn County Public Health Director. Thanks for having us tonight. This has just been sort of a touchy situation because you don't want to cause panic or fear, extra stress in people, but you also want people to be informed and educated. So the high-risk groups are getting very sick from COVID-19, and I'm sure you all have read this or seen this on the news, but I'm just going to go over it one more time, if that's all right. So older adults, especially those over the age of 80, people who have chronic medical conditions like heart, lung, kidney disease, older adults who have chronic medical conditions are highest at risk, people with immune compromise, and then people at higher risk really should take action now to be prepared for this virus if there's an outbreak in our community. So we just really want people to be empowered and informed, not scared. So CDC has a lot of information. I would encourage you always to go to CDC or CDPHE. The items that we replicate that Deanne is really wonderfully helping or doing is all from CDPHE, from our regional health department. We look over that information very closely. We take it very seriously. So, prevention steps. This really has changed quite a bit. I notice what generation people are in, and if you've been around a school or not, to really understand how to do infectious disease control. When I first started public health nursing 5 years ago, I had no idea how effective covering your cough in your elbow, not touching your face, and washing your hands. Our leading disease experts said if we all followed these simple steps, how much of the world's infectious diseases could we actually avoid. So, I'm going to go over them again. And please spread this to people, especially if you see them using the wrong technique. First and foremost, stay informed with credible information sources, CDC, CDPHE. Be prepared for an emergency, so having 72 hours of food, water, medicine on hand. I think we're really good at this up here. I think we're smart and prepared in Silverton. Sign up on Nixle for emergency alert texts. I hope you're all on it. It's also very helpful to know snow routes, etc. But this is a way that people get information out if it is an emergency or an urgent situation. We can let you know how to do that afterwards. It's really simple. So frequently and thoroughly wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. I'm not kidding. Take your time. It could make a difference between an illness or not. If soap and water are not available, use hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol. Cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue, and throw the tissue in the trash, or use your inner elbow and sleeve. I've been doing school nursing on and off for, I think, 15 years, and I still see people my age sneezing, coughing into their hands. Use your elbow, use your sleeve. It really works. If you do cough into your hand, please wash your hands right away. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. Again, this is incredibly easy to do, and I'm trying not to do it while I'm up here. So it really is your reservoirs and your germ magnets are your mouth and your nose, and so it really does work. And then this is the biggest faux pas I really see is not staying home if you're sick. People think they need to be productive, they need to be at work, they need to do things. It's actually harming our community, and I see it all winter long especially. Keep your children home if they're sick, and then talk to your employer about working from home if necessary. It does none of us any good. We need to be a strong community together. We need to be empowered, and protecting everyone. Your responsibility is to protect yourself. Your responsibility is to protect yourself. That way we can protect each other. Then, make sure you clean surfaces in your home and personal items such as cell phones, using regular household products. So, and you all know the rest. You know, touching handles, opening doors with your elbow, touching handles, just, you know, you might as well lick the doorknob. So, just be really aware and try your best. That's all we ask. As of today, I believe we looked up, there's 113,000 cases of the coronavirus, 19 are novel. 80,000 of them are in China. There's almost 4,000 deaths. To give you an idea of flu, there's been 34 million flu illnesses this season, and there's 20,000 deaths. So, because of there's always respiratory illnesses going around. We don't want people to think if they get a cough or a fever that it's coronavirus. It could be anything. But just be aware of what the symptoms are. If you've been around anyone with coronavirus or that has traveled, just be really aware and educated. And Chris, Mayor Tukey and I did find out that our 9 Health Fair has been canceled around the state of Colorado for the spring health fairs. So,
But is there any, do you have any means of testing for the virus if somebody suspects they have it, or do they have to go to Durango?
So we do not have any means of testing right now. They do need to go to Durango, but first they must call their provider or the hospital, call ahead to let them know if they suspect they might have it.
Just another question, do you know that they have enough testing? Or that, so they will prepare also?
There's been a shortage of that. Yeah, so that's currently a serious gap in, they're hoping to get a handle on that. But right now, Mercy does have capability to do tests. So,
Absolutely. I just don't know the amount or the
Awesome.
What kind of communication channels do we have with our neighbors who are likely going to see this first? Same on Basin Health and Montrose Internet.
It's a great question.
Yeah, we're on, there are currently multiple daily calls. So at this point, we're sticking with basically 3 calls, conference calls per week, and staying on top of it. But our agencies have a lot of connection with regional partners, so it's beyond just conference calls. So we're talking with all of our colleagues locally and making sure that we have heads up if we hear about something.
We partner, San Juan County Public Health partners with San Juan Basin Public Health. They actually have a regional epidemiologist, and we talk almost every day.
How also will folks from Silverton be notified if we do have an outbreak or concern? Is that something that will happen via kind of the normal channels like Facebook and things, or what's the best way for people to kind of stay up to date on information?
It's always multiple channels. So we can use example of 416 Fire. We used social media, Nixle, and also we put out flyers and held public meetings. So that would be, it's really, we follow the same process. There wouldn't be really any major change with that. I guess one of the things we'd have to recognize if there was even a few cases in our county that could impact first responders who may be going to treat someone, they could then be placed on quarantine. They may not have any symptoms, but just as an extra precautionary measure. So we're already making progress in setting up plans to have people coming back and forth if needed. So that's going to happen regionally, and that's already been initiated in Washington State.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just before I close, Deanne, did you want to say anything as our PIO?
Actually, Austin, that's a great point. I think Nixle is the absolute most important. That's our first line of defense as a community. It immediately communicates to all of our cell phones. And then I think, just, the 4 of us as the initial team just also helping each other, spreading the word. It's always email, social media, print, word of mouth. But Nixle, that's why we really encourage and constantly want people to sign up for that. That would be the first line of defense and communication.
I'm a Nixle subscriber, but just for the folks that maybe don't know, what's the best way to subscribe to Nixle?
It's very easy. Yeah. do is text 814-332 to 888-777.
Okay.
Yeah. Bruce, Sheriff Conrad.
I might just add, that it should, as far as making a group announcement, again, we're not trying to create any hysteria, so should we potentially have a case here in town, I don't think our first line of defense is to say, it's here, it's here. I think we'd be figuring out who that person's be in contact, providing for some self-quarantine situations before we just go crazy on social media. So don't expect that to be the first line of defense, but we're going to put on that necessary.
And what happens is if you do have a positive case, then that person is vulnerable to quarantining themselves. And so it's, not like we would say, oh my gosh, someone on, 13th instead of us. Coronavirus, we would want you to just continue to do the same thing. As a nurse, I'm always told to go into or to interact with a patient as if they may have a big infectious disease I don't want to get. So using all those precautions to protect yourself. It's a really big responsibility that we hope everyone will take seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have a proclamation to consider for approval that is just the town of Silverton supporting the census effort that's coming up in April. If you'd like to read it, and then we'll consider approval. So we have a proclamation from the town of Silverton that recognizes and proclaims support for the goals and ideals for the 2020 census. Whereas April 1st, 2020 is Census Day for the United States of America pursuant to Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and whereas the 2020 census, the once-a-decade population count, will be open to the public to self-report on March 12, 2020, and will continue through July 31st with an ideal deadline of May 12 to complete the census. And whereas an accurate census is required for the proper apportionment of representatives with the legislative bodies of the U.S. House of Representatives and Colorado State Legislature, and is used in redistricting of state and county voting districts. And whereas the correct allocation of federal dollars for public health, education, transportation, child and elder care, food assistance, emergency preparedness, disaster response, and many other critical programs and services depends on complete and accurate age, population, and other demographic information gathered every 10 years. And whereas accurate census information is critical to the planning for future infrastructure and societal needs of the town of Silverton. Whereas information collected by the U.S. Census Bureau is confidential and protected by law, and any data related to the census can only be released in aggregate form that does not identify individual respondents. And whereas the town of Silverton is a community that is historically undercounted in the decennial census due to dispersed locations, i.e. mountain and rural areas, transitory housing status, language diversity, undercounted age groups, for example, children under 5 and older adults, and concerns about the use of the collected data by the federal government that make a fair and accurate count more challenging, and which requires deliberate engagement by local partners to ensure a high response rate and accurate census. And, whereas that the town of Silverton does hereby desire to support the complete count committee in San Juan County, including the town of Silverton, for the purpose of planning and conducting local initiatives and promotional activities to increase community participation in the 2020 census. Now therefore, we, the Board of Trustees of the town of Silverton, by virtue of the authority vested in us, commit to supporting the work of the Complete Count Committee in San Juan County, town of Silverton, and further pledge our support to ensuring a complete and accurate 2020 census for the town of Silverton for adoption this 9th day of March 2020. So I can only speak that there is a group of county volunteers that are working awfully hard, putting out posters, distributing literature, getting the word out there, trying to promote this whole thing. This is very serious, and Silverton has been traditionally undercounted and probably cost ourselves certain monies and other support from the federal government. So the word is trying to be put out to take this seriously, and when everybody gets their packets, fill it out and turn it in. Yep.
Trustee Renee?
I'll move that we approve the proclamation of the town of Silverton, recognizing and proclaiming the support for the goals and ideals of the 2020 census.
So we need a motion, we need a second.
I'll second that.
Trustee Lee,
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
any further discussion from the trustees? Roll call, please, Kelly.
Trustee Graham?
Yes.
Trustee Wager?
Yes.
Trustee DeKay?
Yes.
Trustee Renowden?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Lashley?
Yes.
Madam Mayor Tukey?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is a presentation by Kevin Farmer, who is going to update the board on two recently passed laws regarding cannabis delivery and use that is passed and went into effect at the state level on January 1st.
Good evening. Madam Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Kevin Farmer. I'm here to represent the cannabis industry, not all of the businesses that operate in town, but just the industry as a whole. The state has passed two new license updates. One has gone into effect for deliveries as of January of this year. It is focused on medical, however. As you'll see in your packets, I've kind of separated out the new updates. The medical deliveries that have gone into effect as of January 1st don't really impact Silverton because we don't really have a medical industry here. It's all recreational businesses as of right now. And so we kind of glossed over that. Now, January 1st, 2021, the state will start issuing licenses to allow cannabis deliveries from licensed retail shops to somebody's personal residence. It's up to each town and county municipality to either allow or deny those in the spirit of consumer choice and all that. There are definitely some, I think, opportunities for the town to allow these without a lot of risk associated to the community. And with that, it'll actually bring in an additional amount of tax revenue for the sheriff's office with each of these deliveries. Part of the monies that are allocated for this go directly to local law enforcement. As part of that, I would ask the town to consider looking at that, and if that's something that you all are interested in pursuing. There are robust security requirements from the state that include camera systems inside the vehicles that are used for delivery. They'll have to be registered with the state, and everything has to go out with a licensed legal manifest, so that if there was, Bruce, to pull somebody over that's making deliveries, all of this paperwork should be in order for them to do it. And then it's obviously over to anybody 21 and over. They make a phone call just like a pizza or anything like that. That is one that you won't see really if the board decides to pass something like that. You really won't see an impact like on the face of the town. The second set of licenses, the hospitality rooms, are really where there could be actually a visible impact to town if the board decides to make some changes. With the recommendations that I've kind of put together at those hospitality rooms, it's so that there's not any visible impacts, that they're not all of a sudden 2 more shops on Green Street or something like that. And so as we get into the hospitality rooms, the state is issuing licenses for on-site consumption. They're basically trying to fill a gap in the current regulatory framework. Because what we have is we have visitors that come into Silverton as well as residents that will go and purchase product in the current legal shop. And then other than taking it to their private residence, they don't have anywhere to consume it. And so we have other members of town and other businesses that are shooing people out of back alleys, that are having them move from a park because they're consuming in public. Those hospitality rooms will allow them to consume in a licensed designated area that meets air quality standards, that is 21 and over, that will also be another tax basis for the town of Silverton. And so with this, there's really not any major changes to the overall state rules. They're just allowing these 2 new licenses to kind of fill gaps in the current regulatory framework. So I'm here to answer any initial questions, and then hopefully work with Paul and John on updating the current ordinances. I have a tremendous amount of work papers that I've already created that I'm happy to just hand over to make the process as simple as possible. But I'd like to just open it up for any questions if you have them. Okay.
Sure, kind of, that's a question.
So your delivery vehicles, are they required to have any lock boxes within them? For taking drive?
Yeah, there's certain state rules that require the box to be accessible only by the driver and another person at the facility. What those specifics are, I can get you in more detail, but the key is that with any delivery that we currently do from one facility to another, there's a manifest that goes down to the 10th of a gram or to the individual seed that has to go along with that transport. And so anytime that the delivery is made, there's a sign off by the customer and the cash transaction for that, for the state rules. I'll check what the specifics are on the lockbox. It has to be in a designated container that can't be just seen into from outside of the vehicle, but I don't know what the lock standards are, but I can get that. And that's something else too, is that all of this is intended to work directly with Bruce and go over with the fire and everybody as far as enforcements and needs from a security and safety standpoint. That's one of the things with the state rules. There's no actual flammable gas allowed in any of these establishments, so any lighting of anything has to be done with like your e-cigarette type of thing in your old car. They push the little button in on the cigarette lighter and it heat warm up the coil, so there's not any actual flame. And that can be additional into our code. It's already at the state level. The state has laid out quite a bit of standards from a safety standpoint, with the exception of the air quality, and that's actually the last thing that I'll mention. There was one footnote at the end of that little document that I gave you around the air quality standards, and I'm just recommending that whatever we do going forward, it at least meets the standards for cigar bars. If anybody's ever walked into a cigar bar, there's not a massive smoke cloud that hits you in the face. It's very clean, and so it's just a matter of the air quality standards to make sure that it's clean for the environment, it's clean for the workers, and then any exhaust that goes out is properly sanitized so there's not any risk of exposure to somebody not inside the actual establishment. So.
Two more quick ones, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Do you envision your delivery vehicles being marked as advertisement?
You can't. Per the state rules, you can't have any visible advertisement on the vehicle at all.
And then as far as your tasting room, being that you're out of town, out in the county, do you have any plans for some sort of a shuttle or?
Well, I don't, this is for the town actually. I've met with the county already to discuss with them, and we're kind of putting that on hold. The way that the rules are set up for me to do something in my existing space out there, I basically sacrifice my ability to run a dispensary. So with these rules, part of that memo, there's limits on the sale amount. So right now with the dispensary, you can sell up to an ounce of product, which is 28 grams. With these hospitality rooms, you're only allowed to sell 2 grams. So it's basically the difference between a liquor store and like a brewery. So for Austin to sell a beer versus Jeanette and Roy to sell a case of beer is really the designating difference. And so the way that the rules are set up, I'd sacrifice the ability to do that, and so the intent is to really try to keep that stuff in town so we don't have to worry about a shuttle service or something like that, and then it kind of keeps the business center in town versus in the county. So, okay. Yep.
I'm just curious, why do you think Silverthorne opted out of having
Silverthorne?
hospitality?
You know, I'm not sure. What's happening right now, for instance, like our neighbors down in South Durango are looking at passing other rules. The current dispensary industry is pushing back heavily because they don't want the competition, and so you even have the industry pushing back against a lot of this. And so, also in Durango, you have the current bar and liquor industry is pushing back against the new rules because they don't want it to necessarily eat into their business, as well as they're also saying that, well, what happens when somebody consumes cannabis, comes in here, or has a beer, and then I've overserved them? Well, that's happening now. It's not that these shops all of a sudden are the brand new first time somebody's going to have cannabis. It's already in existence. It gives them a place to actually go and stay versus smoke something in the back alley or in a business's bathroom, because that's happening regularly in places like Ranch and Durango. And so they're trying to come up with ways to meet these needs. I don't know why Silverthorne specifically, but I know that in these other communities, the industry itself is pushing back, and then the alcohol and liquor bars, and they're just worried about dividing up a pie. Is really what I have experienced from what I've been hearing. I'm not sure Silverthorne specifically. So, I hope that answers your question.
It does. And then there's a certain amount of fee from the school or any use.
Yeah. So that still stays in line with the 500 feet from the school in town, and actually with what I'm actually proposing or recommending, because this is an actual consumption versus going, grab it, and take it somewhere else. You have a risk of even just a door opening and somebody seeing in and stuff like that. So I'm suggesting like Durango, that there's not any on-street main, like viewable, you can see it as more of a speakeasy style, where you kind of have a destination where you have to know where the place is. And it helps with kind of the revitalization of Blair idea, trying to get some businesses that direction, as well as kind of meets that notorious Blair Street a little bit. And so most of Green Street is already out because of where the school is located. Most of everything in this direction is already out because of where the preschool is located. So we're kind of looking at these isolated little spots over in the corner by the Avon and over by the train depot in the economic development corridor. Those are kind of our last little areas where you might see something like this versus right on Green Street. Yep.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Okay, any other?
I just have a question if there's a direction you want to provide us, after this presentation or not, or, just out there, if there's any interest at this time to pursue anything as far as just receiving more information or whatever that, or maybe to put it on hold or whatever the direction is, just so we have an idea of how the board wants to possibly fix it.
Yeah, I'd like to not make a decision right away, but what I'd like them to do is good research if there's other communities in the state who opted out, like I mentioned. And why?
I feel like before we kind of bring anything to the table, or if we do bring something to the table, I think it's important that public input on insurance and have maybe a public hearing schedules.
Moving on, consent agenda. Just open it up for questions or comments from the board. I think we do have a couple of updates and staff reports. Do you want to go first, Todd, and talk about the Gates grant and match?
Sure. As you guys know, we did not receive the GoCo grant for Columbine Park. We're very disappointed. We will be applying again in the fall. To try and keep that project moving forward, I've prepared an application for the Gates Family Foundation. Their granting cycle ends this coming Sunday, the 15th. So we've been pretty frantically preparing, but I feel we have a strong grant we're going to submit to them. That would be asking for $15,000 with a $5,000 match to prepare construction documents and a site plan, which would essentially, that grant is awarded in June. So that would give us some time to essentially prepare construction documents and a site plan to submit to GoCo in the fall for, ideally for the full project funding of the construction grant. I think it's important that we just keep working at this. I'm committed to writing as many grants as it takes to get that park finished. So I saw this as a way to kind of keep things moving. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But to summarize, basically it is a $20,000 total project for construction documents, a site plan, and a utility plan, which would kind of streamline and essentially make the project shovel ready when we bring it back to GoCo in the fall. And I think one of the main questions that we had is whether or not the board is comfortable. The board had approved, I believe it was $41,414 for a GoCo match. I think John and I wanted to make sure that the board was comfortable if we were to use $5,000 of that as a 30% match on $15,000 from the Gates Family Foundation. And that would only be if we were awarded the grant.
And if I may, thank you to Todd. He is researching every possible avenue to get grant money. If we have money in the Conservation Trust, if we could come out of pocket, but GoCo's rules say if you spend it ahead of getting awarded the grant, you can't use it as match money. So this is a way to get a grant to pay for the construction plans and keep this project flowing. Trustee Weed, you had asked a meeting or two ago, what was Plan B? This is the development of Plan B. We reviewed the existing building again in the grounds and just, we're going to try to limber along for one more summer, dress it up. Todd's looking at some plumbing and maintenance things that will make their job easier this summer, not in constant battle with repairs. But we think, we're waiting still to hear from GoCo to understand fully why we weren't awarded the grant. But this is if we are awarded this one, it's a terrific way to keep this really important project going and being more impressive to GoCo this fall when we can say, guess what, we found a way to get actual construction drawings and we're ready to go. We can start to have contractors look at it and get better estimates, all those kind of things. So thanks for Todd, and if we are successful here, it's a pretty big deal for town.
And we had budgeted in the GoCo grant, I believe, it was somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 for the preparation of construction documents. So this is pretty much right in line. And then when we go to apply to GoCo, that would obviously be reduced by $15,000. So it's more of something, if we can do something now, we want to be doing it now.
Don't stop us there, because once again, I skipped over the consent agenda and went on to the stuff from ours. I do that from time to time, so let's backtrack, put a pin in that one, and go back to the consent agenda. Sorry about that.
Well, since I get back to it, I have a question on, who is Ryder? Thompson Reuters.
That is court books,
Pardon?
court books.
Okay. And then who's Kirsten St. Peter, $1,000 check?
That was the wedding that we had at Kendall. We had to reimburse the bride. Lisa or Todd can explain a little more.
So I believe the trustees all received an email from Administrator Ryder about the fact that we had an issue with the chairlift. It happened to be during a private event. We had a wedding that had rented Kendall and then also paid for a couple of hours of time after the ski area had closed for a private chairlift. And because of that, we had to refund the money that they had paid for the private chairlift.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Everybody else probably knows the answer to this, but I'm just curious about the $94,000 and the voided checks, if anybody wants to explain.
That's the total of all checks written this period. It's not a voided check.
All the void, okay, but there are voided checks on there. The voided checks are because the checks ended up in the copier upside down and they printed the wrong way. So we had to void them all and redo them.
All right. And so, okay. I knew somebody would know that. And did we just add a new truck?
It's on its way at the end of this month. So we're standing by with the deposits when it arrives, but it's due any day.
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to go over a couple things in the minutes before we agree to everything. And I did ask that the minutes reflect my part of the meeting last time, if possible verbatim, and of course that is possible. And I did send Kelly an email that has an explanation of all the policies and procedures for jobs and personnel issues. And so she has that. I read it last time, so it's verbatim. And for example, you know, just to clarify, in item, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down on page 12, it talks about performance of reference and background tests. It should be background checks, not tests. And just to clarify, it should be reference gathering. That's just one example of just clarifying and making it more clear how we want to approach the job descriptions and that list of things that I gave you all. And also, I'd like to strike the line at the bottom of page 11, starting with Administrator Ryder, advised Trustee Graham. And I want to say that the purpose of what I said on the 24th was to create awareness and talk about liability with regard to the town. So if we can make those, and I wanted to make sure that we did get all the documents that I had left here on the 24th. And I think you all may have gotten all those documents now. If you got that email from John Ryder that I just sent you, Barbara. So, yeah, I would just like to make those little modifications in the minutes.
If you want, the thing I'm confused about, Judy, is you want your stuff or your presentation verbatim, but to cross out what John had said at the meeting. I think it's necessary to have that in the minutes.
I'd have to go back and listen to the tape to see if that was in the minutes. But in any case, if you all don't agree to doing that, you could just add that the purpose of that conversation was to create awareness with regard to the town's liability.
Is that what you said, though? Okay.
That's what I said. I think that's what I said.
So can we postpone voting on these minutes and for a future date for our next meeting with revisions to those minutes?
Certainly make a motion to continue that.
I'd like to make a motion to continue on the consent, to approve this consent agenda. Except, I guess I would say I would want to approve this consent agenda except for those minutes, or would it be the entire?
Move to approve consent agenda items A and B as presented and continue approval of C until further review.
Okay. I said that.
That's what I said.
So we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
So what are we going to do in the meantime? Wait until the next meeting and talk about it, or talk about it before the next meeting?
I would suggest if you have time, come and listen to the tape verbatim and make your own judgment on whether these minutes reflect what was said. You can rewrite or you can direct me to make changes and we'll bring it back to approval.
I can put them on jump sticks. And you can listen to them that way or come into town hall and listen to them.
You can put them on, excuse me. Okay.
Jump sticks.
All right, so you cannot email.
It's a really large file.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Are you including an okay for A and B, or you just doing
Yes.
C?
Excluding, C.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items excluding the item C. Is that? Yes. And the second was from Austin. Any further discussion? Okay. Roll call, please, Kelly.
Trustee Graham?
Yes.
Trustee Wager? Trustee DeKay?
Yes.
Trustee Renaldin?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Lashley?
Yes.
Madam Mayor Tukey?
Yes.
Now we return to staff reports. So I don't know, Todd, if you had any further to say on Gates. We left it at, they were just looking for, I don't know if it's a consensus or, they're not asking for a specific resolution from the board. We've already resolved to use up to $41,000 in matching, but that's specific to the GoPro grant. So we're looking for the board to allow us just to proceed and use up to $6,000, I think, to match on this Gates grant. And if we need to follow up with the resolution, we can, but we need to get it in by Sunday, so we just want to make you aware we're using our matching funds for similar to what we would use in GoPro. If we need to follow up with the resolution, do that. You know, maybe remind the Conservation Trust monies that are already established for this type of thing.
Okay, so just to reiterate that when it does affect the budget, are we anything over $5,000, right? Then it does need to come to the board?
Yeah.
Is that correct? So say in hiring or hire, does that need to be approved? by the
Yes.
board? I'm just checking. Because
And we did, and
Because it's not in the budget,
That's
if something is not budgeted.
that's right, there was not, so for the admin, when we have made a hire, we won't get to 5,000 for a little while, but at some point we'll have to decide to continue that point or not, because it's going to go to 5,000. And we didn't have a line item specified in the budget for it. Other line item savings and sales tax, we're going to be able to easily cover that, but for now, it's not at 5,000, just because they'll be on a temporary or part-time basis, but we will have to come seek approval to continue that employment, and so we decided to make those over 5,000. Okay, any other questions you want to talk a little bit about your item?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize, I forgot to hand these out at the start of the meeting. If you take one and pass it. And this is a new development, just as of this afternoon, which is why it was not included in your board packet. But what you have in front of you is a memo regarding the Death Ride special event, which some of you may be familiar with. It's an event in support of the ALS Foundation. It happens in June, typically early June each year. Town staff as well as the sheriff have had some challenges and difficulty in working with the event organizer in past years, and it's a pattern that tends to repeat year after year. Last year things kind of came to a head, and there was a discussion about the event continuing with somebody else at the helm, a new organizer besides Mr. Barry Sapinski, who's been the organizer for many years. And there were also some statements made that they were just going to move on and not come back to the community. They have approached us again about hosting this event in Silverton this coming June. I had a meeting with Administrator Ryder, Deanne Gallegos from the Chamber, and Sheriff Conrad this afternoon to discuss our thoughts around this and some problem solving. Essentially, we're not in the habit here in Silverton of telling events no. Generally, we say yes because we're recognizing the economic boost that we receive from hosting events here in town. But the sheriff, as you'll note in the packet that you received, has a lot of concerns regarding safety, adherence to liquor licensing law, and also just generally community respect that we feel is lacking with this particular event organizer. So the group at this point is feeling like unless there is another person in charge of the event, that it may be something we consider turning away this year. And I wanted to make sure the board was aware of this. I don't know if you recall the meeting in June last year where a couple of folks from the Death Ride came to the meeting and appealed to the trustees, and they said there would be a new organizer. And that is not what we're hearing now. I'll defer to Sheriff Conrad if he wants to add anything on this, as well as Deanne and Administrator Ryder. But I did want to bring it to everybody's attention so you're aware that this discussion is happening and aren't surprised if this event does not return to town.
And what type of time frame do you have? Do we have, can we get that to you?
I wanted to bring it
Because we
to...
wanna digest the-
Right. I did want to bring it to the board's attention as soon as possible and not wait for the next board meeting, simply because from the event organizer perspective, if we are not approving an application for the Death Ride to return, clearly Mr. Sapinski needs to find either an alternate location or make other arrangements for his event. I think we were all under the impression that they would not be returning. And have recently, just in the last week or so, reached out to us to
So do we
express
have-
interest again.
Do we have 2 weeks to then come back?
If the trustees would like 2 weeks to consider it, I think that that would be appropriate. However, I do want to communicate back with the event organizer that there is a discussion being had about whether or not his application will be accepted. I think that's only fair.
Maybe we can have a special meeting to discuss it prior to the next meeting. I mean, 2 weeks is quite long, and we might forget. I mean, we have a lot of questions, and maybe Sheriff Conrad could be there to could set up a meeting for 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, actually, I think on the agenda at some point, so the board can discuss it, if he wants to show up, or if representatives want to show up, and, you know, be part of the conversation.
So you're saying
It should be on the agenda, yeah, discuss it.
well, then, I have a big question. I don't know if you've considered this or not, but if there were 2 people that came to us, there were 2 people that came to us last June, what happened to them?
I included the gentleman, which his name was, I'm not sure if I included it in this memo to you all. I included him in my email communication with Mr. Sapinski. And Mr. Sapinski came back and indicated to me that this gentleman, whose name is Phil Sanchez, would not be organizing the event. It would be Mr. Sapinski again. So Mr. Sanchez was CC'd on the communication. I've heard nothing back from him. There were statements made about creating a communications plan to smooth things over with town staff and the sheriff and make sure that the event went smoothly last year when they were here before the trustees, and we've heard nothing from them until this email from Mr. Sapinski last week.
Just wanted to ask Sheriff Conrad if that's acceptable, if we have a special meeting, if you'd be able to attend, or if that's something that you might see a conflict with and want to get a statement now.
Yeah, I'll tell you now, it's pretty simple for me. This was 10 years into this, every year's been a nightmare with this individual, so if he's involved, I'm not going to approve it. What that means for you, we'll have to discuss at that point, but as far as it goes with me and the sheriff's office at this point, if he's involved, we won't be involved, we won't approve this event. So I think that it's important to have the appropriate wording, because if we just tell him that we have someone else at the helm, like we've done in the past before, they'll be running the show again and say that this guy is running the show, and it's not the way it actually plays out. So I think the wording needs to be something along the lines of him not being involved and not being here for this event. And I'll be happy to talk to someone new with money and make it happen. If you've never turned down an event before, don't plan on being in these shoes often, but this has been a very unique case and very, very frustrating and very safety concern that I think put the town liability as well. So happy to discuss it further anytime.
Lisa, as far as you're concerned, you haven't heard of another name, you just heard Mr. Sapinski.
Correct. I actually questioned Mr. Sapinski about Mr. Sanchez and was told no, that it would be Mr. Sapinski. So I can read you the language from that email.
Just before we read anything, just so the board knows, any application you're considering is an organization. And there might be an individual running it, but your consideration is not based on that person. It's based on what's being submitted to you. The sheriff, other agencies can have comments. You can consider those comments. Maybe or maybe not they meet the standards to approve the application, but you're not denying or approving the application based on the person itself who submitted it. So it's just something to consider in the future. So whether it's it's how the organization as a whole is being managed and run, whether they meet your requirements. So you got to take this guy out of the equation here, as far as your considerations in the future.
This event too happens in not just our community, correct? It also has to go through special event permitting in some of our surrounding communities as well. Is Mr. Sapinski the one who is in charge in those other places, or is he just kind of the Silverton guy?
I don't know that it actually requires to go through the same permit he does here. The event's kind of based here. It starts here and it ends here. They just kind of go through Durango and Telluride as well. So I don't know what other events they have there and whether they need the same kind of permit.
Thank you.
But we could certainly gather more information.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think we'd like to, I would like to, and I don't know, I'm sure what the other trustees and their believe or feel, but I would like to consider this and take it to the next agenda.
As a work session.
Sure.
So I'll try to schedule a work session for next week, so we can get more details and information prior to putting it on the official agenda, whatever action we might take. Okay.
Are there any other comments or staff reports?
Is there a date for that work session?
I'll have to set it and get the trustee schedule and then we'll post it. We'll shoot for Monday or Tuesday of next week. Oh, we can't do that.
Nope.
So then probably Tuesday. Shoot for it. You want to try to schedule it right now?
Sure.
We could say Tuesday at 6.
I teach on Tuesday evenings.
Wednesday, but it will planning commission is at 6:30.
Wednesday's a chamber meeting.
So we could have a work session before that.
If you'd like to do that Tuesday at 6, I don't think this would take any
She-
longer.
I have an obligation.
Oh.
She's got an obligation.
5:37.
So can we,
Yeah. And Wednesday is a chamber board meeting, as we were just talking about.
Yeah, we can then do your schedule.
a Tuesday, earlier, Tuesday?
4:30?
5 to 7:30 or?
5:30 to 7, so I'd be fine if you were saying 4 o'clock, that would work.
4 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Okay,
Check the full
So it's
calendar.
Tuesday the 17th at 4. Any other comments? Staff reports?
Grayson and everybody really just worked really well together to make sure that we could make the most efficient use of time to get people off the lift. And I don't think anybody really had to sit on the lift after dark. So, and I thought it was a really good outcome. And I just want to say thank you and congratulations for getting that well done.
Thank you for coming and lending a hand.
I did nothing. I stood around and helped direct traffic.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Well, and also thank you for that in time. Also thank you for everybody in the paper.
If I need to provide a quick update, like your comment did come out this week. We identified, this was a very similar problem to the problem we were having around Christmas time, when we had to close Kendall for one day. We did kind of go more in depth than we did in December. We did identify the underlying problem, and we believe that the lift is absolutely healthy and safe to operate at this point. It has been adequately repaired and no danger to the public.
Any other trustee reports?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to discuss Bridal Rockies. It's my understanding that they approached the community about the possibility of having us be, say, a destination. So if maybe you could explain why we don't have Bridal Rockies coming.
Yeah, we looked at it and we see jump into, we just didn't think we had facilities that's been here before and we were on this and we were asking for, I don't know, having meals and places to stay and we just didn't think we had the capability of this.
I would just think as a board, would something like that be appropriate to bring to the board?
Sure.
Because I was involved with Bridal Rockies in 2002. It was the day before the fire broke out on Missionary Ridge, and I'll never forget that. That it was a huge, wonderful event that hit Silverton the day prior to the fire, which then, well, it was the day they shut the train down. It was the very next day after the Bridal Rockies. And at that time, the chamber took care of the event. We paid someone, I believe $3,500 to $4,000 to lead the event, and her name was Ellie Cote at the time, and she created subcommittees, and it was actually very successful. And yes, I think that, you know, there are things we can't provide in this community, and that might be a hot shower in the gymnasium. Well, we put signs up saying, you're going to get a cold shower, you're going to take a shower in the gymnasium. We faced what were our challenges, and I believe we did quite well. Yes, we did have to provide a meal at Kindle, which only about 200 to 300 participants showed up, because Silverton can handle the restaurant seating. For people to get a meal in this community, if you count the restaurant seating, we can handle 900. I don't know, but and we can turn those tables over. So, Bridal Rockies did require the dinner to be provided, and we did do that. And it wasn't quite, we tried to convince them that we can handle all of them in town. But we still did that. It was very successful. They reached our trucks in. We unloaded luggage. We had bike security. We had maps. It was successful. So I would hope in the future that something that big, as far as for the business community, would come to this board, please.
John,
Yes.
you know, Chamberfield did it first. In 2002 to 2020 was a completely different beast. And not only can your Ray not manage it, it takes your Ray and Ridgeway So I was definitely one of the first ones who looked at the packet, and it was beyond illogical. It was the amount of camping space, the security of the bicycles, for free providing meals. I mean, it was just something that the chamber couldn't even fathom, to be quite honest with you. And then we looked at Lisa, and we all took it extremely serious and went through the rules and the regulations, and I even tried to work with Uray. We were going to be a spillover. Ridgeway had to turn down a day. They couldn't even handle it more than 24 hours, so it was going on to Montrose. And I totally understand the success in 2002. I've heard about pot roast being baked in people's kitchens then for the chamber in order to pull that off. But what they're asking for in 2020 would not only take Uray and Ridgeway, but Silverton as well. And you do have to hit the checklist and the boxes. And so what we did do was partner for them, for us to be a stop and to host them at the visitor center and definitely encourage them to spend some time in Silverton. But definitely me being the first one who saw my eyes on it, it just seemed absolutely almost illogically impossible. But in the future, yeah, we could definitely break it down for you guys and look at it, but don't think that we didn't take that very serious. We didn't try and work with Uray and Ridgeway. But it took Uray and Ridgeway, they could barely handle the one night, and that's pushing their limits between both communities, and that is why they went on to Montrose.
I just think it would be something this board really needs to consider in the future. It's such there's many things why it would benefit this community. I'm not going to list those.
It would completely overwhelm and stack this community beyond even 4th of July.
Because 4th of July is a big event, and I think we can handle it.
I just don't want you to think that there was just we
No,
actually
I understand that.
brainstormed and
I
we went
understand
through
that
it.
information, I would have appreciated, or I don't know if the other trustees feel that if that information could have come to us.
It was the chamber that was approached, and then I brought it to these guys.
Okay, thank you.
I think the issue would have been good for the boards at least been informed about what's going on.
And you'll have to recognize that I was here for about 2 months when they approached us, and I'm still was getting to know where the board would be getting involved in the retrospect. That was a great idea we should. We'll definitely make that for future. So we make sure we're bringing it before you before we at least let you know what we're doing and allow a chance for variance.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Just out of curiosity, how many beds were they saying that they needed for that event?
It was, it was a couple thousand hotel rooms. It was camping for about 5,000. Uray has a little over 1,000 hotel rooms, and it took Uray, Ridgeway, and some spill over into Montrose just with the hospitality aspect. And then you also had a camping aspect of thousands of people that you had to not only provide hot showers, but free meals. So they expect nonprofits to feed them for free, and that it would, come back in sales tax. But if we put all of our nonprofits together and donated food and meals, it was definitely going to be something that was extremely challenging.
I would like to say that I do agree with Trustee Kay that it would be great if something like that would come before the board, and we'd be informed and have some chance to have a conversation about it before the decision is made.
So,
And Judy, I know you weren't at that particular chamber board meeting, but their process is to give you a packet, and it's basically, can you achieve this packet? It's not necessarily saying yes or no. They kind of give you your criteria, and can you actually achieve that or not? They have very high and certain expectations. Again, this is 2020. It's become a different beast than it was
I hear you.
decades ago.
I hear you.
If I may add something, Madam Mayor, on the list of priorities as far as what staff is going to be working on, one of the things that my department will be working on is procedures for special events. We have some informal procedures and a way that we've approached things in the past, but there isn't actually a formalized process. And so I think that when we're able to spend a little time and energy on that and give it a little more structure, some of these concerns will be dealt with, and we'll make sure that it's outlined, you know, when it's appropriate to engage the trustees. There will be an opportunity for you all to weigh in on how that process works, and for us to get a little more solid on how we're dealing with special events, because some of it is a little bit nebulous and has kind of been created as we go. So we'll be working on formalizing that.
Any other trustee reports?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to ask Administrator Ryder if he was able to get the email out to all the trustees that have the documents that were important to me, including a fourth document that I gave to you on last Wednesday. Were you able to get that out?
I sent it out, I got no bounce backs, I have hard copy here for everybody's backup.
Oh, okay.
So
I
the
could
trustees will have to
send
tell
that
me.
out. I could send that out right now to everybody if you want
I
me
don't
to.
know if, I send out 10,000 emails a week, and I don't, you must have bounced it back, I don't know who got it and who didn't, so I assume they got it. If you didn't get it, I'm probably going to your spam for some reason, or something like that. You have to check, because, you know, email that doesn't get delivered gets bounced back to me, and that's how I know it didn't get delivered, and none of them came back. You know, I've got all of your emails that you like to use. And I know you receive other things, so why this, I don't know which trustees you told me, anyone that didn't get it, I don't know who that is, so. The trustees this morning at about 8:30, I sent out that packet material, if you didn't get it, I can confirm.
So this was,
And I guess I'd like to know emails, because I don't know why you wouldn't be getting them, why you get them sometimes and sometimes you don't, that doesn't quite make sense, or it might be a spam or security thing on your end, that's preventing delivery, or preventing going to a folder other than your inbox.
I'm on my email right now, it's a town emails, there's no reason that it should go to spam if it's coming from a town email, but I got my email this morning.
So we're gonna have to clear this up, because each one of you have been assigned the silverton.co.us email, but it didn't appear that anybody was set to receive that one on their computer or phone, so we went back to personal emails or designated emails that seemed to work fine. I think that's what Kelly sends all the packets, and you get them. So for whatever reason coming from me, some of you aren't getting, even though we're sending you that same email address, which could mean that whatever my email address is, has got some kind of security block on it. So I can't tell. There's no way for me to know what's happening on your end.
so I'll just, I can send that email right now.
No, because if you do that, it's against number one, the sunshine law, it needs to go through Mr. Ryder. And we've talked about this before.
And again, we have a full hard copy of your.
If anyone needs it, there's a hard copy.
So I'll reach out to you guys individually, and we'll do tests on the phone, and I'll send you and see what's coming through and what's not, because I honestly don't have an answer as to how I'm going to be reaching certain people.
Well, this is, I think, of great relevance to this board and this town and this community, and I would like to make sure that those things get to all our board members. And if there's a community relevance also, so.
Well, anything I send you, I want to get to you, no matter the relevance. If I send it, it's to be received. And again, I don't have the computer knowledge of how you're receiving it on your phone, the computer. We may have to have our computer IT people go do a double check and figure out what's going on.
Well, I guess I'm just gonna assume that this,
It's like we talked and you said I didn't get it, and I sent it to you when we were on the phone and you got it, so I don't have an answer.
well, nobody else did. So I'll just assume that it's gonna be another opportunity for this to come up and clarify it and address it.
I don't think I've ever
The email that he prefers is silverton.co.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. That's all.
You get except I send both of them to you for language.
I usually don't get physical copies. Digital copies.
I have a link that's taken from townhouse.com.
I'll talk to Jim Phelan, who is in charge of Secure Group, who is our RET people, and I'll talk to him tomorrow about everybody's emails and find out what's going on and why we're not being able to get the emails out to everybody.
He's getting all from Kelly, and I use the exact same email addresses, so. Unless mine goes, well, you're spending, well, emails today, we had a couple.
But I started those. Maybe
Really best to figure this out, once and for all. Trust me,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel as though I have a duty to perform, a fiduciary duty to perform, and this is an important issue. So I'm assuming I'm going to have another chance to perform this serious duty.
Okay, so noted. I think we need to continue on the agenda. We don't have any more continued business, Mr. Ryder?
No continued business. New business is just a discussion on the Silverton Lake Campground negotiations. Just wanted to bring you up to speed. At the next meeting, we will be looking to approve the acceptance of conservation easements, the abandonment of right-of-way. This has been a discussion that's been going on for some time, so I would draw attention to the two maps. I'm trying to graphically display for you what we are giving up potentially in right-of-way, that's in green. So this is all kind of the Silverton Lakes area. As you recall, in exchange for that, again, most of this right-of-way, virtually all of it is an undevelopable wetland river corridor that can't be utilized. What we gained is the red line, is the campground road that we've got there now. We determined originally we only had a small utility, a 15-foot tall utility easement through that campground road with no access. So in exchange for this, we're getting 40 feet width of access through that campground road, which is realistically the only road to get through the campground from the far from the, I guess it would be the west side to the east side without going through wetlands. It's already an established road, so we're getting a firm access and utility easement in there. And then we're also getting a access easement along this part of the Animas River for potential future trail building, kind of holding out our option on that. As you know, also in exchange for this, the town has not had to fund any of the survey, any of the wetland mitigation, which has been quite costly, being borne by the Silverton Lake owners. We've talked to virtually all the owners in this area. Of course, the Heinbaus are in agreement, Lisa Merrill, who owns properties in agreement, Sheriff Hunter owns properties in agreement. Lot 8 up here in the corner of the Andersons, Beth and her husband Brian, who are in agreement. So this right-of-way, basically, as it is abandoned, half of it will go to one side of the street as ownership and half will go to the other. But as Paul and I have negotiated, we think the town's getting great value in return. Most of this is going to be put in wetland conservation type easements and is not developable in any way, and it would be very difficult to put access any other location than the existing campgrounds. And then also as part of the wetland mitigation in the Heinbaus, the Army Corps asked if the town would take and hold the conservation easements that you see with the blue lines on this map. And we would be agreeing to do that in our overall agreement and easement exchange. That puts the protected wetlands in a conservation easement perpetuity, which we think also has some value, because there's some good wetlands in that area that this will help preserve. So I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything to this, but we just kind of wanted to let you know a couple of weeks in advance, this is the final pieces of the puzzle have fallen into place, and we'd be looking to officially approve the abandonment, the acceptance of easements, the entering of the new access easement, and so forth with the next meeting.
If I may add, maybe, I mean, we talked about this, I think, maybe, it seems like a while ago now. But maybe we're taking a step back on how we got here, maybe for the members of the public that, are scratching their head why we've been looking at this. It came about because of the alleged violation of the disturbance of the wetlands down in this area. Towns involved because some of those wetlands were on town-owned property, being the roads, and alleys in this area. So that's how this all came about, and the way to kind of the Silverton Lakes has kind of taken the initiative in creating a plan to present to the Army Corps to remedy the past violations and to fix it. So they've been doing surveying and have come up with this plan. And so this is just the plan. The plan involves potentially vacating the roads and alleys, the preservation of some of these wetland areas. They will have certain responsibilities on their end. So it's kind of as John was saying, a package that would be presented to the board. And the board can then consider, the pieces of it and make determinations on all these things. But we want to just bring it to you at this meeting in case have you think about it and ask any questions right now. So we know in advance if you tell us, well, we have these concerns, then we can be better prepared next time to address those concerns.
I also might add, it was several months ago that this board did approve a letter of intent that outlined kind of the provisions that we'd be negotiating in this honors in terms of that. So there's really nothing to approve at this time, but if you have questions or you can take a look at this and study and have questions for next time. I just wanted to kind of bring it back to percolate it back up to the top here.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have some concerns with this, and I have since we started going through this. And I have some questions for sure. I'd really like to see some acreage numbers as far as in these areas, how much acreage we're giving up, and I'd like to know how much property some of the property owners own in this in comparison as well. Particularly the Silverton Lakes owners seem like they're getting more land out of this right-of-way abandonment than they actually currently own. I can understand why we would abandon right-of-way in an area that was damaged wetlands, which is a very small portion of this overall agreement. I'm really unsure as to why we are abandoning right-of-way across that red road, that red line, for where the road is. I understand a little bit for some of the wetlands, but up in the area where we're conserving the river access in the right of way, that's all. The river border trail that we have is almost 100% on the town's property that they own now. And I guess I'm concerned that this is a really big deal for the town. I understand completely why Silverton Lakes thinks that it's a very necessary thing for the town to do, but I'm concerned as a public trustee that we're not necessarily gaining a whole lot of value for the town by abandoning these right of ways. And so I guess I'm going to need to be convinced of that. That's where we're going.
Just to further question. The trail, now can you explain its extension, or is it just?
The reservation of an easement should we elect to build a trail along that side of the river at that location.
And does it, is there a reason it stops?
Lisa Richardson and her husband are acquiring or have acquired lot 6 there, and they have indicated to me that also a part of the river where it is more than likely the trail's going to be on the other side of the river. On BLM on plan is going to get hopefully dedicated to the ship. So that was the reason. And Pro Tem Mayor Lashley, the only thing I can tell you is it looks like a lot of right of way, and it looks like we're giving it up. But for us to extend roads and alleys across this property, we are going through serious wetlands and we require serious mitigation. So the biggest change, other than the fact that the applicant here, the Heinbars in particular, haven't not asked the town to fund some of this expensive wetland mitigation and so forth, is that we're going to abandon the right of way. But the biggest change here is the 40-foot access easement we're getting down Campground Road, which is about the only way to get from west to east on this
When you
property
say
without major disturbance.
expensive, what is expensive? Do we, give us a number.
So if I may add, the first thing the Army Corps would do if the town ever wanted to put a road or alley here is they're going to look for alternatives. They're going to look at ways of avoiding the wetlands. That would be number one. If for some reason there were no other alternatives, then you're going through all this other mitigation, and as far as expenses go, I mean, we can ask and be prepared to talk about that next meeting. And as obviously if it's in the future, those prices will change, we can talk about present day. And I just add the other kind of things that for the board to consider as far as value to the town is here we're getting out. The town would be getting out from underneath the current potential liability in the existing alleged violation that the Army Corps has. I mean, there are fines associated with that, and they're essentially, this plan would address, the Army Corps' concerns. Additionally, it relieves future liability. The town, in this wetlands area, it's very unclear. I mean, if you go out there, you don't know where the alleys and the streets are, and that's how this originally came about, because nobody knew that this disturbance was occurring on town property. In the future, I mean, that could happen again if these alleys and streets are still there. If they're obviously vacated, then there's no more liability for the town if there's any kind of disturbance there. So I mean, those are just benefits that the board will consider, and consider the negative next time, and kind of weigh those, present.
And also, I remember the last discussion we had about this, is that if we could find out if these are low-grade wetlands, is there the potential that some of this, because it is a good property, would would not be designated as wetlands? I mean, what is low-grade, there's probably different levels of wetland. So what are we looking at?
That's where you get into your expenses. I understand it, once it becomes a jurisdictional wetland, it's governed by the Army Corps of Engineers. And if you do disturb it and have to rebuild it, you have a cost that is associated with the type of wetland you're repairing and replacing. Fen can be more expensive, for example, than some of the less complex wetland systems. But once it's a wet jurisdictional wetland, it's governed by the Army Corps, and they do not disturb it.
Agreed, but there are distinctions where they feel in 10 or 20 years it may be a low-grade wetland that may not be a wetland in the future. That's where I'm going.
I think those are things next meeting. Hopefully, we'll have some of the representatives from Cognitive Consulting who created this now will be present. They're obviously experts in this area. We'll be able to address some of those questions. So we'll make sure that they're aware of those and ready to address them.
Okay, yes, sir.
Anything else from the trustees?
Okay, with that, we are going to do a public comment. I'm sorry. This is another opportunity if anybody from the public would like to make comment. Lisa.
Lisa, come up to the podium. And then State your name.
Lisa Merrill from 331 East 18th Street. I wanted to address some of your concerns, or well, some of the part that we are involved in at least. On the map, Amherst Street from 18th Street to 19th Street, we are in negotiations with CDOT to do a wetland restoration there. However, one of the requirements from them that was given to me was that I needed to get that portion of the road abandoned, that they only wanted to work with one owner there. And so that's certainly one reason why the abandonment is important to us, is to help facilitate that restoration. Then I also wanted to address the discussion of the easement and why we aren't open to having an easement there, even though Ron has allowed that as part of his. And Ron and Sean and I have all, we're in agreement and have great relations with all of this that's gone on. We've had good communication. The surveying was pulled off really very well together, and he got what he needed, we got what we needed, so that went really well. And do I have any time for this? I'm not sure.
Still have a minute.
I'll cut me off soon. But the easement along the river corridor there, we have no intention of keeping anyone off of that space. We don't want to have no trespassing signs. We know it's an important place for people to enjoy the river and fish and do all the things that happens along there. However, we don't want to see a constructed trail there, and that is because we are in large part doing this as a wildlife corridor, so it feels contrary to the purpose of what we're trying to achieve with the wetland, to have an easement that goes right there, where it would allow a constructed trail one day, even though it might seem not feasible right now. We just don't want that to be on a map somewhere in the future. Those are about the main things, but we're totally open to answering any of your questions right now about that too. And we will be here in 2 weeks. We can discuss it. Sure.
Any other public comment? Okay, at this point, we're going to take the steps to go into executive session. We'd like to excuse everybody but the board and the rest of the motion first.
Okay, so we need a motion in a second to go into executive session. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Just leave everything, because we just got to get out of here.
Okay, I move that we go into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-402, parentheses 4, B, and F for conference with the attorney to give legal advice on employment categorization and compensation provisions.
So we need someone to second that motion, please.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion from trustee McDonald, a second from Mayor Pro Tem.
What's recording?
It's still
Lastly,
recording.
Oh, okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we're going into executive session. If anybody, before we actually go in, needs to make a dash to the bathroom?
I think it's right here.
No? Okay. Okay, so it is March 9th, 2020, and the time is 8:49 p.m. For the record, I am the presiding officer, Mayor Chris Tukey, as required by the Open Meetings Law. This executive session is being electronically recorded. Also present at this executive session are the following persons: Mayor Tukey, Mayor Pro Tem Lashley, Trustee Renowden, Trustee Barella is absent tonight. Trustee Graham, Trustee Wiegert, Trustee Decay, Town Administrator, and Town Attorney Kosnick. This is an executive session pursuant to CRS Section 24.6, 402, 4B, and F for the conference with the town attorney to give legal advice on employment category, yeah, that one, and compensation provisions, sorry. I caution each participant to confine all discussion to the stated purpose of the executive session and that no formal action may occur in executive session. If at any point in the executive session, any participant believes that the discussion is going outside the proper scope of the executive session, please interrupt the discussion to make an objection. So, announcement number one. Okay, this is before the conclusion. So that's where we're gonna, okay.
So we can open it up, I think, with a little background. Trustee Graham has provided us numerous documents. She spoke to the issues of some election violation and possible legal vulnerability related to Gilbert Archuletta's employment separation agreement and his eligibility to be a candidate in this election. I'll open it up to Trustee Graham. I can only tell you from our perspective, we vetted Mr. Archuleta as a candidate and found him to be eligible and not to be in violation of the separation agreement through Paul's legal work and review, and that's where we're at. So where we go from here is something, I guess, that needs to be discussed, because I'm not sure we've had a call to action to do anything other than bring awareness. And so I guess I just will offer it up for you guys to discuss. And I don't know if you can give us guidance on action items in this session, but I felt we ought to have a discussion just to vet what the issues are and consider possible action items. It may have to be taken in a public forum or back in a public meeting. But
I guess I will start only because I seem to be the only one that was here when one of the items was documented.
What
the item for Mr. Archuleta for the agreement.
I was on board.
Yeah, but
Oh, or does that not?
no, that's fine. But I'm starting this only because
Right.
my comment is when this was done and Mr. Robbins put it together, it was according to him not being part of the employment of the town. It didn't have anything to do with whether or not in some time or another he would decide to run in an election. It was just for the employment issue at that time. There's a part of me that doesn't feel like we can say to somebody, no, you can't run in an election. You know, we don't have that authority to be able to tell anybody that they can't do that, which seems to be part of the issue right here. He is not an employee of the town. He is running in our regular election.
So the fact that we fill out a W-2 and we have paychecks, how does that play in?
So the agreement itself, I mean, under Colorado law, it's very specific. You have employees and elected officials.
Okay.
And this agreement, you know, is expressed. There's no ambiguity to it. It says he is prohibited from being an employee. If there was an intent to prohibit him from being an elected official, it would say that. The other issue that we have here is this was a government action, you know, signing the agreement. The town signed it and took government action on this. You run in all these constitutional issues if you're trying to prohibit somebody's right to run for an elected official. That's like saying now he can't vote. You know, you're running into a lot of constitutional issues. And so when I looked at this, I'm looking at liability issues for the town. Does, you know, by him running, does that create any kind of liability issues? Looking at the express language of the agreement, it doesn't say elected officials, it says employees. Second of all, you add the constitutional element to it. I think if the town took the position that somehow it was much broader than employees and we meant to prohibit him from being an elected official, then there's some liability issues for the town there, because I assume there would be a challenge coming somewhere that you can't take away my constitutional right through that agreement. Even, you know, I'm going to say, even if this agreement did say he's prohibited from being an employee and an elected official, still would question the enforceability of that provision itself, just because, again, government action can't take away somebody's constitutional rights, you know, through a contract. So, and there's no constitutional right to being an employee of the town. You know, that's not part of it. But once you start becoming an elected official, voting, you know, you start getting into freedom of speech issues, you start getting into freedom of association issues. You know, these are things that I would assume, you know, if somebody got an attorney to, you know, look at it and the town was saying he can't run for elected officials, you know, there would be some issues, I think, that the town would have to really dive into and say, okay, you know, these are concerns if we move forward trying to enforce that provision. So, and again, that's not even what it says to begin with. It just says employees. So that issue came up originally, I think, when some people from some residents came to John and said, hey, you know, there's this agreement out there, and that's when I looked at it initially and reported back to John and say, hey, I didn't see, you know, any kind of liability issues in this. So now at this point, just bringing it forward to you guys to understand, you know, kind of the rationale and thinking of why, you know, it wasn't raised up to a higher level initially because it wasn't, you know, thought of as a real liability issue for the town, you know, at that time. So, and to answer your question, yes, the IRS does treat, you know, have different definitions and classifications for people versus state statute under, you know, under municipal code. So there is, you know, you can go out there and find somebody with a W-2 would be considered an employee by the IRS, but that doesn't necessarily make them an employee under Title 31 of Colorado statute. Might even make them an employee under some other title, I don't know, but we're dealing specifically with Title 31 issues here, which is the Title 4 that the town comes under.
So that would be the supporting findings. Your supporting findings are the statutes.
Yeah.
State statute.
In the Constitution.
So just so you all know, and thank you very much for distributing these documents. I appreciate that, John. And there was no call to action because I don't have an opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have an opinion on especially taking somebody out of an election. I mean, I'd be curious to know if, you know, if you can do that, but that was not how I envisioned it. As I sort of talked to a number of different lawyers, it seemed to me that from the community standpoint, the community might be better off just leaving it the way it is. And that I sort of personally came to that conclusion, I don't know, a month or two ago. So the issue was the board awareness and the town awareness for me. That's the issue that I'm most concerned about, and I just feel strongly that, that everybody needs to be aware. And I think at this point in time, that happened long enough ago in 2015.
14.
Where people have forgotten and they're not aware. And I think we need to have transparency and promote awareness and information. And it's especially relevant in this period of an election. That's what makes it relevant.
Judy, I don't agree with that because, you know, you can dig up dirt on anybody, and that's in the past. You know, if we stick to something like that, then we need to talk about all of this.
But
and
what do you mean by
backgrounds.
that? Do you mean that contract?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, everything that happened 6 years ago, 5 years ago, the agreement was signed 5 years ago. So what? We've already had it determined to us that he's legitimate, he can go ahead and run. So, you know, and the smallest this town is, everybody knows what happened.
No,
I mean, yeah, they do, they're asking
but
questions.
So you and I are going to disagree on
Yeah,
that.
we are.
And we will. I forgot
Austin.
what I was gonna say.
Thank you, Mayor. I completely understand why this issue is so divisive amongst members of the community, and that's why we're here talking about it tonight, because I think it's important that we take our role as trustees seriously, that we are trying to do our best in our roles. And I agree, Judy, I think it's important that we're here to discuss this right now, to determine what liability the town does have from this, because we have a liability on one side of violating somebody's constitutional rights of running and seeking election. And on the other hand, we've got this agreement that was signed not only by the town of Silverton, but also by Mr. Archuleta himself. And I've asked a little bit of legal help, more municipal help, with people that I know who have experience with municipal help about this, and they're really unsure without having, you know, physically laying eyes on the contract and seeing what it says as well. But you know, since Mr. Archuleta has signed this contract as well, and I believe that the verbiage is will not seek employment with the town of Silverton, that he agreed to, that was kind of a red flag for me as far as what position does that put us in? Since he's agreed not to seek employment with the town of Silverton, and as a mayor, you do receive a paycheck, and do we have kind of some kind of examples of this in the past where elected officials are not considered employees of towns, or any kind of case where this has happened before? Also curious if anybody's reached out to Patrick Rondinelli, and if he had any suggestion as our kind of DOLA representative and somebody who may have seen an issue like this happen before to us. I just, on both sides, I'm just concerned for the town and for what kind of liability we could put ourselves in either situation. If we prevented somebody from running, we're in one legal liability, in one situation of legal liability, and if we're on the other side, then we could have people coming after us saying that this is a violation of this agreement, and that the town partook in it, and that the town is now open to liability. So it's important that we get a kind of a legal distinction, but I'm curious as to kind of if there's any kind of precedent for this.
So I did some research within Colorado itself. I didn't go outside of Colorado. I didn't see any precedent where there was a settlement agreement, which essentially that was, where somebody was prohibited from running from elected office. Like, that didn't show up anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, and so just to take it, I think at the end you hit the nail on the head there with there's liability whichever way you go when you're trying to weigh, you know, the liability. And so if a court ever looked at this agreement, you know, the first thing they're gonna do is look at the plain language of it. What does it say? And as I kind of started, statute really does distinguish between what an elected official is and what an employee is.
Okay.
And that's kind of, they have their own definitions, and so that's distinguished. So just looking at the plain language itself, it's tough to get over that hurdle for, I think, a court to say, okay, even though it says employee, you know, he gets a W-2, he makes some money, he's under maybe insurance in some aspects, he's then an employee, but that's not what statute says. So that's kind of like would be a judge reading, you know, past the plain language of it and trying to get to a certain result. And so I think that would be highly unlikely. I mean, it's not impossible, I mean, but it's highly unlikely that a judge would look at this agreement in that way. So, I mean, and the other thing to think of too is, I don't know what kind of, I didn't look into this, but typically a member of the public doesn't have standing to sue under a town agreement. So a member from the public can't come in and say, well, the town had violated this agreement with this other person, so I'm suing on behalf of the town, or I'm suing the town. They're typically not what's called a third-party beneficiary to the agreement, meaning it's just like if you have a contract with somebody else can't say, well, you violated even though I'm not even a party to the agreement. So it's a little harder for a member of the public to come in and sue the town because you violated an agreement with somebody else.
But if there were a project that came to the town and for some reason, say there was a denial of a development.
Different, that's not a contract. That's going to be a quasi-judicial matter where they can challenge your determination. Somebody could have challenged this agreement right after it was made and say, hey, the town, you know, exceeded its jurisdiction, you know, you guys made a bad choice on this, and challenged it right after it's done. But that's not challenging it based on a breach, that's challenging it more on you had no basis to do what you did.
Okay.
So just to finish that, I think there's a lot more liability if you're breaching any of his rights versus, you know, if for some reason, you know, that's the other way around, the third party's not going to really have standing to come in and, you know, sue you guys for breaching this agreement, if that makes sense.
So the most they can do is recall everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that could be, they could say you're ignoring the agreement, you know, you're not following your duties as a, but as far as, you know, the financial liability of the town itself, it's a lot harder for a third party. I mean, it's not impossible. They have to show that they've also been injured. But
Well, there's also the matter, and I don't know how this plays in, is that there's a deadline for someone to challenge someone running, and that's long since passed. We did our due diligence and, you know, declared him eligible and others not, and nobody from the public challenged, and the deadline has come and gone. So there would be some.
But was this brought to your attention a month ago?
Was what?
Was this brought to your attention a month ago?
We knew from the beginning that he had a separation.
From the beginning.
Oh, sure, before he was
Okay.
determined.
I guess from the beginning, what did you just
Well, we had to look at this, we had Paul look at the separation agreement to see if it was possible that he was ineligible because of this agreement, and that was.
Oh, I guess I'm just a little shocked it's, that this wasn't discussed long ago. I'm just a little
honest,
shocked.
I'm
that-
shocked that this wasn't discussed kind of.
Well, then, if it was brought to your attention that we weren't, say, informed, then just to let it
And
go.
I'm even trying to think of how it got brought to my
There
attention,
were a couple of
but
people that came to John, and then there were also, there were a couple election qualification questions on various people that were running.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
and so,
Oh, at that time.
you know, and
there's,
so.
they hand in their
Yeah,
application,
you
and
know,
then
on
there's.
residencies
Sure.
or some, and so there were several of these questions going on.
Yeah, each candidate had to be looked at, and
Yeah, and I don't agree that it shouldn't necessarily come in front of us, like especially right away.
No, but a little email, or I just mean just something like, or these candidates fulfill the requirements.
Well, why would
Yeah.
we care? I mean,
That's true. That's true.
and remember,
But I guess
this is run on,
Well, why are we here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's raised a little more steam recently as far as these questions keep coming up, like
Oh.
why, you know, is there legal liability? you know, with this.
Okay.
This is something, you know, sometimes we look at contracts and John will ask me a question, I'll say, well, yeah, this is a no-brainer, there's nothing here, you know, and so
Okay.
this at first didn't seem like it had the momentum to be, and again, maybe that's, we were being naive about it, but I think recently it's raised, you know, more people have been concerned about it, and so that's why now, I think that's why we want to bring it in front of you, to have everybody understand it, and, you know, and ask questions and share, so.
And thank you for that.
I don't think initially when it was written that there was even a thought that someday he would come back and want to run for whatever. I think it was more because right after all this happened, we put out to have somebody come to do public works. And he actually put in an application. But I think Jeff had done this before. And I don't think that the reasoning for him doing it in any way, he would have thought that 6 years later, we'd be hearing about this. There's a part of me, and I'm going to be real honest with you guys, and you can take it wherever it comes from. I really had hoped that after this much time that we had gotten to a point where all the harmfulness and the whatever you want to call it, you can call it hate or whatever, had passed the revenge thing. And all this did for me was it opened a scab. And I don't appreciate it. I don't feel comfortable with it. I was really hoping to leave the town in a good way after 6 years or 8 years of getting whatever. And to have this reopen, for me, it's a real hard thing. And that's just me, because I was in the middle of it.
And especially hard for one of us.
But, you know, I mean, I really had hoped that we had gone past the, whatever you want to call it, the revenge thing, the whatever.
Yeah.
And that it was even going to be a part where, you know, Gilbert and I could say hi to each other and it would be okay. And then this just opened up. And that's just where I'm at, you know. I mean, in 35 more days and it's not going to matter where I'm at, so.
And Chris, I'm very, very sorry for that. I'm sure that is difficult, and I'm sympathetic with you. But when I started thinking about this, the way that contract was written and the way that it could be interpreted and challenged from many different directions, that was a concern for me from the point of view of the town and its possible liability. So for us to not deal with that question seems neglectful to me. And I mean, there are other things we could talk about that have to do with emotion and other things, but that's not where I'm coming from now. I am just, you know, I'm not sure about the way that is written, and it's just open to a lot of interpretation. And we, as trustees, have to pay attention to that from the standpoint of the town. And I feel strongly we also have a duty to people. So I guess my next question would be, is this a public document in that it has been referred to many times, for example, in that article that you, thank you for attaching that. Is that a public document? And what are our rights, or what are our limitations with regard to that document?
You're referencing specifically the agreement, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
That is a public document.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. And would you be willing to put in writing your legal opinion about this situation? What we're talking about here?
I could put it in writing to the board itself. That would be a confidential attorney-client privilege document. If the board chooses, you know, if they want me to relay to everybody, you know, what I've been talking about tonight, that's fine. I can do that if that's your desire. Again, that would be the attorney-client document, so nothing that would be shared with, you know, anybody from the public, unless the board voted to share it, then it could be.
I don't know. I'd be curious to know if you all have any interest in
I just think for any future harm that could come, it would be nice to, you know, have a document that's just explaining the reasoning as to why we were holding this position. Or what our attorney's position was on this and why we supported doing what we did.
Right. So just state my opinion to you guys, and
Yeah.
if you chose to make a different decision, if you said, well, you know, I've been talking to so-and-so and I think he's wrong, you know, then you could make a different decision during a board meeting, you know, in the future. But at least it will memorialize, you know, kind of what, you know, I've looked into and my opinion on it, and then you guys can have that for, if that's your desire. It's up to you.
I would like that, but is that, do we have to go back into another session in order to vote for that, or can we ask?
You
I don't
can
think
just
so. It's
provide
just an
direction. I'll just also,
attorney-client
yeah, and I'll say,
privilege.
yeah, you could do that, or you can, you know, this is all being recorded too. So I mean, if there is a desire to put a lot of it on paper, you know, yeah, I mean, there's, it probably wouldn't be too complicated to do.
Sure, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Sure. And then I have another question. And I don't know, I hope it's related to this, but if we ever do have, say, information that we would like to share with other trustees, is that, I mean, information, not an executive, but meetings, and we give, they're to be put in the boxes, right? Given to us, or how does that work?
So you could share information at meetings. You could bring handouts and hand it to everybody. That's fine.
Okay.
You know, there's no clear answer on if somebody just sends an email on, you know, this is my feelings on all this. Don't respond. Kind of like Judy.
Right.
Well, there's no clear, you know, that goes both ways. I
Meetings.
mean, because once you hit 3 people, it's a public
Right.
meeting.
Right.
4, you know, you're noticing it.
Right.
There's also what's called a serial meeting. You know, so if, say, every one of you went to, you know, stood outside her room and then went in and talked to her about the same thing, you know, a court might look at that differently.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's
Okay.
very factual based. I mean, it's not per se against the open meetings law, but it does run, you know, it does run the risk a little more. You know, if, like I said, if every one of you, you know, went to talk to her, you know, within a half hour, then, you know, that might look a little differently than if just one of you went to talk to her. So, you know, so my answer is I don't have a clear answer to say that is a violation, but it could be if you pushed it far enough.
I mean, if you sent, you know, individual emails to everybody on the board and then they responded with,
Yeah, and if you start talking, you just imagine a circle of everybody whispering in each other's ear. You know,
Yeah.
eventually that's, you know, a court might say, okay, that
okay,
really
that
isn't
became a serial
but,
meeting
you know,
at
yeah.
that point. But as far as like sharing information,
Yeah.
we just
Yeah. If you say, you know, you could
blast it out.
certainly share information, and, you know, even at time, I mean, if say Judy had sent that email, you know, Jess, and said, come talk to me about that, that's fine, you know, but it's once you, yeah, get into it.
Okay, but so the last meeting, Judy gave John information to, at our request, I guess, but she gave you information, right, that we could request, or at that time, should that have been put in all our boxes, or?
I took the instruction from the mayor that she said, give it to John, and if you guys want to come and seek it out. And some of you did.
I
And it was-
did.
Yeah.
And it was in the trash.
Well, that was extra copies in the recycle bin, because I had the official copies, and I was out of the office, and I directed Kelly to give it, so that was, yeah, this is what's, you know.
It's okay, it's all right.
I understand,
I'm okay.
but this
I'm
has
good.
come up a number of times, that somehow
I'm
we
good.
threw stuff in the trash, and
But
that's,
it's the truth of it. I'm.
well, it
I'm
was,
not a-
okay. I was,
it was the truth. I went in and asked, and she pulled it out of the trash. It's fine, it's fine. I just wanted to know what we do with information we give to each
Yeah.
other, and how that works.
and
And so just for clarification, I know our beloved mayor does not like me communicating the way that I've done. Should I not do that?
I would say, I'm going to tell the board that there is a no yes or no on that answer. It's up to the board to determine, you know, I think as a whole, is that something we want to allow? Because I'm going to, it could go either way. And there's no clear case out there saying, well, you know, one trustee sending it to everybody and saying not respond is a violation of open meetings law. So it could be interpreted either way. I mean, the conservative thing would be not to do it at all, but, you know, that's for you guys to decide.
So if three of us had called her as you requested at the end of your directive,
I don't know.
That's,
okay.
I don't think, you know, I mean, it gets into the facts of, okay, what did we talk about, you know, how was this
And
relayed?
how does she present it, other than, okay, let's not talk about it, we'll bring it up during the board meeting?
During the board meeting, yeah.
Okay. But there's no way well, okay. I
Yeah.
think it's very dangerous to do what you do. I do it for your sake.
well, I
Maybe
think it's,
won't do it again.
well, it's a little, it's exacerbated by the fact that she is trustee Graham, representing the town, and she is also candidate Graham.
yeah.
That is, you get into a point of using town time to possibly campaign against somebody, which is, felt like where we were going that night, and
Yeah.
none of us were prepared that you were gonna make those comments, so I was in no man's land of, is the town, you know, is the election getting in jeopardy because we're maybe stepping outside the
I knocked
lane?
my socks off and I still haven't found
But,
them.
you know, hence we're here trying to sort it out, so.
Yeah.
So.
Jess, you had your hand up?
Thank you for that, everybody.
no? Okay.
I just have one more question, and maybe this would be of Madam Mayor. How was CIRSA involved in that contract, or were they?
CIRSA paid the claim, so they paid out of insurance the $35,000.
It was done for the time frame that it was necessary and the need was done.
CIRSA is our property liability and casualty
Right.
insurance coverage, and I have the
It
loss
didn't
run.
come from some line item on the budget. It actually came from
Insurance.
insurance.
And that's very nice to know. You all do know how I have felt over the years about these settlements that we paid out. And so that's a place where insurance has been handy.
Austin?
Thank you. I think that in the future, if we're gonna have these kinds of discussions, it's probably best if we can have them on an agenda item, that way that they're discussed, and that way it doesn't feel like, I do feel like it kind of violates a little bit of the sunshine law stuff to just like throw things out there that aren't on an agenda, that way the public has a chance to be present or respond to certain things. And certainly I think our town staff deserves that heads up as well to know what's happening on some of these things. And I just had one other question regarding kind of the other portion on this too, which is something that we probably have never dealt with and probably don't need to deal with very frequently, but the town may need to have a sheet to pull out of the book and say, this is what we do. As far as challenging election contributions and things like that, do we have some kind of policies set forth in the town code?
Town is not an enforcement agency on the election.
Yeah.
You know, if Trustee Graham saw a violation then we kind of have a decision. We'd report it to the state,
Okay.
the Secretary of State, and say we have, and whether that rose to the level of a hand slap or just take the sign, I don't know what the punishment would be, but then you have to decide whether it's the town's role to be reporting violations. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but to have that discussion would have been helpful, and to talk to Paul and, come up with a course of action, which we didn't really call for a course of action. We just made mention of it. It's just kind of hanging out there. Now town believes they're a violation. We're not an investigative body to go track it down. We've been told, and the papers reported, that the Friends of the Fire Department did not in fact pay for the ad. It was his family, so there probably wasn't a violation, but I didn't go out there with my badge, and because that's really not my role and probably not the town's role. But I don't know, Paul Way and the Board of Trustees could have elected to report the violation, and then the state takes it from there as far as enforcement and punishment or fine or whatever.
Is that kind of the proper protocol or steps? Is it comes to you and it does that, or should it just be advised to citizens to take it straight to the state? Sorry.
So there is a procedure if somebody, and it could be any of the board members, if they see a violation of the election laws, I believe it's the clerk that's designated as the intake, and they receive the violation, then it would be transmitted to the state. And from what I understand, this whole process is kind of a mess right now because it's kind of new, with lots of municipalities don't have the clerk designated with the paperwork and all that stuff to intake the complaints, but that is supposed to be the process now. And that's really for any, member of the public, and, that could be another employee, it could be anybody, but they report the violation to the clerk, and the clerk then transmits it to the state.
And then I guess, is it the town as a board, reporting the violation, or is it citizen whomever who happens to be a trustee reporting the violation? There's a distinction there that needs to be made.
Well, it would be a citizen, because, it's not, unless you guys want to have a vote on a violation, it's going to be the, anybody
But if
in
it's
the private.
brought to the attention of the clerk
Right.
is to do it.
Yeah.
To do the, to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, the town has an administrative role in all this.
Oh,
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if it might be beneficial to future candidates too, to have a handout with their
We do have
packet too, that just says we do for election laws and what everything goes. 'Cause when I was running, I don't remember having.
Yeah, we had there's a candidate manual that we put together. Does it address 100% of everything? No,
Yeah.
probably not, but
Yeah, just as far, it's not, in the current scope and size of town, it's not exactly we're out there fundraising and doing, $100 plate dinners for candidacy being on the town board. But, but just in the future because I remember being about a month into the campaigning, whatever that was, and somebody saying, you gotta be really careful with the election laws, and if you take money and if you fundraise and do stuff.
Yeah, I've had about 5 days off in the past 6 weeks.
But,
Well, thank you.
yeah.
oh, we have more.
Oh, we do?
Oh, we do.
We have the original reason for calling the executive session was to
okay.
kind of, and I can do this quick. So, another thing that has come up and percolated up is the employee handbook and compensation packages, and Trustee Graham brought up several items about hiring practices and background checks and lack of procedure, and so we attempted to try to address that. It was on our priority list that we had put together, and I think it was Trustee Barella that said also, put the employee handbook and associated issues higher up on the priority list, so we have. So I've begun a review of the employee handbook from a compensation and categorization standpoint, who's exempt and who's non-exempt. That's governed by the Federal Labor Standards Act, which is a long-standing law that dictates overtime and who gets salaried and who gets what benefits and compensation. And looking at kind of our main 8 or so employees is who I've gotten through so far, we've got a little bit of a contradiction and a bit of a mess on our hands, in that the employee, if we go look at, say, a Todd Bove at the top. Per the employee handbook, his position is non-exempt. It's currently practiced in the payroll is non-exempt, so that's good, and FLSA says it's probably a non-exempt position, so we're okay. But then he's somehow taking advantage of what we call comp time or administrative leave, where this was set up for exempt people, which means salaried. They do not get overtime by law, but the town at some point in the past set up this administrative leave / comp time where if you worked 50 hours in a week, you could take 10 of those and use it and work 30 the next week and still get paid for, so there's a way to kind of balance out seasonality. A lot of our employees, work hard in a particular time of the year and then they take a little time extra off at another part of the year, and it balances it out. And it was a way for salaried employees to kind of make up for the, the 60-hour work weeks and take a break later on in the year. So it's fine. Those hours are to be used in the year they're earned, and they don't get to carry forward. So in the case of Todd, he somehow, somewhere was told or started practicing comp time, even though he's a non-exempt employee. So I flagged that as a I don't know if I'm going to say violation, but something that's out of compliance with our employee handbook. Let's go down a little bit to John Seitz. John Seitz in the employee handbook, the Public Works Director, is clearly a non-exempt employee. However, we're currently practicing him as a hybrid exempt, non-exempt, where he's salaried, but he gets 1 hour of overtime for each hour he works, which is a violation of the federal law. As an exempt employee, you cannot get any overtime, but there's some agreement and handshake that happened way back, and so he's getting 1-to-1 overtime. So now in this one, we're out of compliance with the employee handbook. We're violating federal law. So we really.
He didn't. It wasn't a handshake. Remember, we voted.
There was supposedly an ordinance, and we can't find it.
But we did. We were here.
Was it an ordinance or just an approval to do it? I mean, just because that year he was working a lot of hours.
That's right.
Yeah, we did approve.
But it wasn't an ordinance.
No,
No,
but we did approve it.
Yeah,
I
we
just
did a
want you to
verbal
know it's
approval
not out of
with that
some.
one.
We did approve it.
Yeah.
Not, for him, it was something different.
But why is he per employee handbook?
I don't know. An exempt employee by law cannot be paid overtime.
Well, he's listed though in the handbook as not.
And he's not, so why,
That
I
doesn't
don't,
make
this
sense.
hybrid that got approved is just not, it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Well, and then also.
In a perfect world, John Seitz comes to the board or comes to Lewis, I think, or whoever the administrator was at the time, and says, hey man, I'm working 60 hours a week now for the 6th month in a row. I either need a pay adjustment, or the appropriate thing would have been, nobody can sustain 60 hours. We need to get John some help and hire somebody else, but there probably wasn't money to do it. So this thing was kind of put together to help compensate him a little more. Noble effort. Nothing was wrong except for it's just against the law. So
And I think it was practiced prior to John.
it could have been.
It
Oh,
was.
yeah.
So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, no,
to all of
as a
you.
non-exempt employee, he was totally eligible for overtime, but at time and a half.
Yes, because,
For clarifying that.
yes.
Okay, I mean,
John is,
it doesn't change the
I know.
issue of today that I've been tasked with solving, so I'm just telling you where we're at. And
Well, it's been my experience, and I know you don't like to hear the fact that I work for the federal government. Anybody that's exempt is usually a supervisor.
Mhm.
And John definitely is a supervisor.
yeah, you can make the case
Yeah.
that he's exempt. That's a tough one, because he's also, there's definitions in the federal labor law that talk about who qualifies as exempt and who doesn't, and it's not perfect. It doesn't cover every single job and everything. So at some point, this is my first stab, not being a labor law expert by any stretch, but we're probably going to have to bring in some help or talk to CIRSA or Municipal League or Rhonda Nelly. So, we'll have to draw on some resources here to say, how would you classify these folks? I just know we have these discrepancies in what's in our handbook and what the law says, and then what we're actually practicing that doesn't add up, and that could get us in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, the PTO.
Yeah, PTO. So what I did is I asked every employee a series of questions. What do you think your current job description is? What do you think your compensation program is? Do you think you're exempt or non-exempt? Because this is what we are missing in the employee files, that hardly any job has got any kind of written agreement that specified the terms. And if it exists, we just can't find. Kelly and I have scoured and talked to previous, Michelle and everybody, like, does this stuff exist? And the employees don't even have it, so I think a lot of this stuff was just agreed upon verbally. And so it's hard to tell what they were promised at the time of their employment or through promotions. And so I said, just tell me honestly what you think you have right now. And, some of them think they have unlimited PTO that can be accrued year to year. That creates a pretty big liability for the town that's not on the books, where they're accruing, hundreds of hours of PTO that may or may not be legit. Most of them are within guidelines of the handbook. Only Jackie Kerwin's getting up there because she's worked, for 27 years.
She's had that forever too. I mean, Bill.
And she's worked, I think, for 20 some odd years, and so she qualifies to carry 728 hours of PTO, and because of her length of time, she'll get 260 hours of that, 360 some hours of that at dollar for dollar payout when she resigns or terminates or what, and then the other half is 50 cents on the dollar. So the employee,
It's a huge liability.
that's, yeah.
I like the idea of carrying over more than, excuse me, so many hours, 240 hours, if you use it or lose it.
Well, the whole idea
Bill
here
Barber,
is,
though,
the whole idea is
he
here, we
brought
want
up
them.
Jackie, excuse me a second.
Sorry.
He brought up Jack, remember when he did that, Jackie's time, what did he want her to do? Just close the library and take the time off?
Yeah, well,
No, he wanted her to continue working. She wanted to work 3 days a week
And
and
have
be
somebody
paid
else.
out some of her PTO and then only work 3 days a week. Well, that's when the library had its issue, mold or water or.
That was the first mold
Okay,
issue.
and Bill said, no, I really want you there. I want you working, so we'll go ahead, that was it, and pay you, but I want you there 5 days a
Well,
week.
apparently they
Or
didn't.
something. That's what I kind of recall. It was just a little, because of the crisis, he wanted her there. That's what I remember.
Well, and there was a time when we would get the payroll stuff, and we also got a sheet that showed how much PTO people had. And that suddenly disappeared over one of the absentee
and I
administrators.
tell you that, looking at individuals' payrolls and accrued PTO is not something that rises to the level of the mayor or trustees. It's incumbent upon me, as we're doing, to say, we're coming up on a problem or an employee has a specific issue that I need help on. Jackie wants to work 3 days a week and take PTO, or that's kind of a major operational maybe change, and that's something I'd bring to you. But I mean, again, you can look at all you want, but I also just want to make sure you're not in there in the weeds and overwhelming yourselves, because that's what you pay all of us to do.
And will you rework this?
I gotta see where we land, but yeah, some of these deals have to be reworked. And it's gonna be painful. We have a whole set of non-exempts that are getting comp time and taking, we've got people that I'm finding out that are like trying to cash out paid time off, and it's like, no, you take time off. That's the point. You just can't use it as a bank. And so there's going to be a little adjustment period here.
But there's also been in the past where someone, just from what I can recall, took 4 to 6 months off. I'm thinking, well then, do we really even need that employee?
Exactly.
I mean, it's to compare to the real world. I don't want
I
to
am totally serious.
negotiate against myself, but I mean, right out of the chute, people accrue 6.5 weeks of vacation from day one. I mean, they have to work and accrue a little bit each year, but I mean, that's how much they can take 6.5 weeks.
Wow.
So I'm doing some calculations saying I really have my staff for about 10 months a year. Okay, that's about 82% of hours, and so listen, I'm sitting here trying to run the whole thing, and I'm like, yeah, people have, and then beyond that, they don't take it because they're working hard, and then they have the right, and we don't have really an employee, that says you can only take 2 weeks at a time, but they've accrued some massive amounts of time off, and sometimes they take it, it's within their right, the way things are written.
Yes, sure.
And it's going to be tough to change because they're used to it. And
Something I'm noticing here, and maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but it just seems odd to me.
is Kelly underpaid?
Yeah.
I mean, she's right there at the bottom. I don't understand that.
Yep,
I
she
mean,
is.
Compared to some of the others.
She is.
I mean,
And
you
she
work
should-
with her, you know what her capabilities are.
Well, there's three people really that need some serious thought here. Sites, Lisa Branner, and Kelly. The three of them are probably not. John may be okay because he's getting overtime, but if we take the overtime away as an exempt employee, we may need to do something with his salary.
Well, he gets comped on.
And that's, that's still your working hours. You're just spreading, you're working 60 hours one week and 20 hours the next to try to, so you're not really getting paid anymore through comp time, unless like some of my employees are trying to cash it out for real money, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't do that. The whole idea here is, and PTO, the whole idea is to take time off. We all know that these employees don't make fair market rate even down the road in Durango. And part of that is our choice to be here because we want to be here. And part is, that's what the town can afford. And you got to find special people that want to be here, and money's not everything. And then the town is, for salaried employees, has tried to make this, this comp time thing, a little more agreeable, and there's a little more vacation involved probably than the real world. So, you try to balance all of that together to keep good employees and that don't break the town's bank and try to keep everybody happy. And it's not easy.
Well, I applaud you for at least looking into this and
Yeah.
getting through this because this has been an issue since before I was on the board for sure. And I've heard about it from members of the board for years, and members of the public. And definitely our last two administrators who were asked about it were like, oh, we need to, that's a whole nother discussion and a whole big issue that seemed insurmountable at the time.
Well, and I think we also need more in-depth job descriptions.
Yes,
because
and I asked them to, and they did. Kelly, for example, I said I would like a relatively detailed job description of what you do today, and they did that for me.
Well,
So
and Lisa too, because a lot of people in town don't understand why we're paying her so much.
right,
Yeah.
and her scope of work has gone exponential these
Yeah.
last couple of years, and she's this is a great group, all of them. They're a really great group.
Yeah.
But, Sites is a rock star, and Branner's a rock star, and Kelly is a rock star, and they probably I need to think about them and present something back to you as far as getting them whole and correctly classified and making sure they feel good.
I have kind of a collective question for everybody as far as Lisa's job title in that position as well, because if my memory's correct, the town voted on having an events coordinator, and that's how that position got started. And since it was voted on, I don't know if that makes her job description any different than anybody else's.
So I also-
since it was, right, and then it probably wasn't necessarily.
That's right.
Yeah, so
It's just
it's kind of just a collective question as to.
Yeah, so I also asked each of the employees, on this list and a little bit beyond, what do you like your current job description or job title, or would you like to consider something new? What would you call yourself? And Lisa came up with a new one, Director of Community Engagement and Development, or Director of Community Development Engagement, one of the two.
Yeah.
It starts to make some more sense because she started, special events coordinating and producing, and then moved into community relations, and now she's on the point for the Kendall Ski Area expansion, which is enormous task. And so she's, her scope of work and responsibility has grown pretty significantly. John's has remained relatively stable, and Kelly's has grown. We combined the deputy clerk and the town clerk together under one, and she's stepped up to the plate. We redlined him a little bit, hence we wanted to get and have hired the administrative assistant to take some pressure primarily off of Kelly and Lisa, because it would be awful to get them into a position where they were burning out and left. That would really stink. So,
Like, for instance, Bill McDougal takes a month or two off, doesn't he, or 3 months?
I
So
don't
what
think
does
he
he
can
do?
now, though, can he? I mean,
he
gonna
takes
be-
November off pretty much, I guess, as a matter of routine, and
It used to be November and April, but I think that with his
well, he's
part-time,
to full-time.
Full-time.
I think now that it's full-time.
And You know, we had that talk at a staff meeting or two ago and said, I'm looking at the whiteboard here and seeing all the vacation and time off and people traveling and doing this and that. I said, first and foremost, you're entitled to it, take it, be responsible about it, and don't let your team down.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to pass some of this stuff off. Bill has to pass off to Lisa Adair. And, Kelly will pass off to me, and you know, and I said you need to line up with your teammates that it's cool to be doing this and that the work can get done, and you'll need to reciprocate when your teammates ask for you to cover for them. So that's how we're kind of approaching it.
Lisa Adair, I think that, well, I feel she has quite a load.
Oh yeah.
A huge load, and because Silverton is having so much, I feel, development or building going on, I've always been concerned about that position needing help.
Yep, no
needing
question.
an assistant.
And she'll be on the list. There's almost no question I'm coming back to the board, you know, in 2 months and saying we need to make this kind of a, and maybe still part-time, you know, at 24 hours, but extending beyond elections and all that, because Lisa could use help too.
The county shares that position, so maybe they would share a part-time helper for her.
They could, yeah.
Because,
well, it would become part of.
Because the load is
Well,
I think at times.
Yeah, it is.
One place or the other, and it pretty well equals out.
And she does a lot of administrative stuff, putting together planning committee meeting minutes or packages, you know, her own reports for this board. I mean, she's got a lot of paper she pushes, and that's where this person, you know, that we hired can take load off of her too.
And I think that was at least part of the rationale too, to expand the building inspecting position to be full-time too, so that they could provide some support to.
And he does.
He does. No, I mean, you know, one of the one of the main things the three of us have started having a standing meeting on Thursdays is this whole zoning code revision, and you know, that's where Bill's a big help, and it's not just Lisa alone trying to lead that charge, and I'm jumping in, of course, to try to help out as well. But
John, I gotta say that I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to see what the job entails, both jobs, your job and Kelly's, and you've saved a lot of money for the town, honestly. So, you know, I think right now we need to hire somebody to help you guys.
yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Who did you hire, if you don't mind?
Nate Baxter.
Oh, awesome.
Yep. He's, you know, for the Lisa Branner stuff, he's a great face and a great customer relations kind of guy. And his background, he's done a lot of office type work. He's just a great personality. And so he'll be great up front dealing with people. He knows Silverton. He's been here. He just signed a lease for a year. So we had 7 pretty good candidates. It was tough. You know, there were 3 of them, 4 of them. One, Nick Fodder, was terrific, but just I don't know how we could have kept him. I think he would have been bored in an hour. He was real horsepower. But you know, it was a testament to, you know, people wanted to work at town. You know, even in this kind of role with seven people applying.
Can I ask a question? Has everybody been getting those, and this is off the, whatever, from Nicole, somebody that is concerned about the air quality in Silverton being the worst in the state?
I haven't heard anything about that.
I'll have to send it
She's
to
sent
you.
it to us 3 times.
To you guys? I've never seen.
Yeah, she goes again.
I got it, but there was like.
And that would be just during
And
these.
if you guys are at all interested, I know Trustee Graham, you brought up concerns about the hiring practice. This is something Kelly and I have worked on. It's written into our files. It needs to be translated, although a lot of it is in the employee handbook. It just wasn't being followed. But, you know, on Nate, there was an application, full resume, all the candidates. And then for Nate, we did the CBI background check. It was $5 and takes 2 minutes, so we'll do it on everybody, just for the sake of doing it. You know, we were worried it cost, you know, $1,000. No, it's nothing. But, you know, reference checks, you know, the whole 9 yards, and Kelly cleaned up all the employee files. They've probably never been as clean. It has allowed us to identify, you know, where we're missing an I-9 or need something updated, you know, just because now we have it organized and we know what we need to have in each employee's file. This will be, you know, when we get here through this cleanup, you know, everybody will have some kind of written term sheet agreement, re-sign that they understand and acknowledge the employee handbook.
Will some be grandfathered and then there would be a new policy?
You know, it's going to be hard. That's the dollars are in the PTO accruals, so that.
It doesn't have to be grandfathered, I don't think. I
Well,
think
some
you can change somebody automatically from non-exempt to exempt and tell them what they're.
Yeah, and I don't think that means they forfeit any accrued anything, but, you know, if they go from exempt to
But-
non-exempt, there could be.
But then a change is
Yeah.
forward.
Mhm.
I mean, the change takes place.
And so we'll have to dive into this in a little more detail and almost look at each individual and use CIRSA as, you know, kind of some help with, okay, this is what's been going on as far as, you know, their pay and stuff. Yes, you could change a lot of them, you can reclassify people, you can reduce salaries, you do all these things. It's just, are you creating any liability by doing that? You know, generally not, but we just want to be careful to make sure, you know, there's not reason, well, you changed my salary because, you know, this reason, and it's not really because of, you know, so you just got to think through all those things before, but, you know, and just to add, I think this is great, you know, that he's looking into this, because one of the things that originally pops in my mind, some of these things that we have to sign, you know, we have to say, okay, you know, for grants, for instance, are you in compliance with federal laws? You know, this is one where, you know, the faster we can get this done, the better off we'll be, so.
I sent you Nicole Rose's last email.
Okay.
She wants us to do something about it.
Does she even live here?
I have no idea who she is. Do you
I
know?
think that happened in Tyrant, the air quality from the streets, the dust and some different issues, I think, right? Surfaced there.
I mean, you
And
know-
then the EPA got involved, and I think it was quite something about air quality.
It happened in Aspen as well.
Okay, just.
I know at Durango Mountain Resort, part of our requirements was to monitor air quality and all this, and we spent $600,000 doing it, so get ready.
It's okay. The EPA's only worried about the
We
Orange
spent,
River.
we took
The Orange
25,000
River.
pictures of the mountains to prove that there wasn't any air quality problem, but. Yeah, I don't know, I'll have to read it and look at it. I don't know where to begin with that one until I understand, I guess, what her issues are and what she's asking us to do and whose responsibility is it to do it. Probably, we gotta figure out why.
Fenner email did not have a lot of working links, so after a little bit of.
If there is an air quality problem,
She's talking about, it seems very
Yeah.
quasi-science.
But if you get, you know, if we find out or somehow get along the path that we determine we have some kind of problem, you gotta go find the source and hopefully stop it, but.
It's probably in Arizona, all that dust.
Yeah, I know.
Probably is.
Down in Durango, some of the worst air quality we had was coming out of Arizona and New Mexico.
And if you think Durango's bad, you should see Pagosa when they get hit with the dust storms.
Yeah.
And then just.
So anything else?
No,
there,
I guess I
guys?
just remind everybody, this is an executive session, confidential. Please keep, yeah, if you don't mind, or you know, I trust you, but you can keep them if you want, just, I put on it, you know, pretty confidential. Its salaries and everything are probably all public at the end of the day anyway, but we can.
But your notes on them aren't necessary.
Yeah, no, the notes would be
How long can we keep our,
90 days.
so, if we, is that, should we keep them indefinitely?
It's the law. They get, no, they're kept, they're kept, well, they're
No,
kept,
you have to keep it 90 days. If the board wants a different policy, you guys can say keep them for 6 years. It's up to you.
What is
Policy on it.
typical?
Not 90 days is the.
90 days.
And what?
And you don't want to keep them forever because there are boxes of.
Community.
Oh, I've never known anybody to adopt a policy to keep them longer than 90 days, but
Okay.
you could if you want to.
Okay.
I think you're on.
Anything
Mayor.
else from anybody?
Not high on the list.
That's good.
Okay, so.
I should add some might keep them for 6 years, but it's not because of a policy. It just ends up in the back of a safe somewhere.
And the boxes change because the way that they keep track go from this size to this size to this size and now. you know, the thumb drive.
Oh, yeah, the original was in the big tapes and the cassettes in the
Yeah.
back.
Mhm. Okay, so I hereby attest that this recording, all right, the presiding officer, before conclusion of the executive session, make sure recording software is still on. I hereby attest that this recording reflects the actual contents of the discussion at the executive session and has been made in lieu of any written minutes to satisfy the recording requirements of the open meetings law. The recording will be given to the town attorney and retained for a 90-day period. The time is now 9:54, and we conclude the executive session and return to the open meeting. So then you get to turn off the tape.